brown bear saved the man, the very man who once tried to kill it. No one knows why, but from that moment on, his life was never the same. The snow had just melted along the western edge of Yoho National Park, revealing cracked patches of damp earth and clear animal tracks. Lars Beckett, 43, dragged his moss-green canvas tent into a hollow near a dry creek bed where the trickling water dripped in slow, steady pulses like breath. He set up camp quickly, efficiently, silently, not out of respect for the forest, but because in these woods, silence meant survival. Lars was a man who no longer believed. Not in God, not in people. He believed in guns, knives, and the instinct to stay alive. He didn't look up at the sky. He looked down at the ground, where animals left tracks and he laid traps. Everything else was just noise. One hand pitched the tent, the other never strayed far from his old semi-automatic rifle, lightweight, matte black, no shine. Beside the tent, he set 2 steel traps, each the size of a man's thigh, lightly rusted but razor-sharp, lethal enough that a bear would only have to brush against it for the jaws to snap shut with merciless precision. Once the tent was secured, Lars sat on a rotting log and pulled a worn leather notebook from his coat pocket. The pages were darkened by moisture and sweat. He wrote with a pencil deliberate, firm strokes, "I just need 1 bear, 1 bullet, 1 payday to disappear." It wasn't a vow. It was an exit plan. Lars didn't plan to stay here. He was wanted in 3 states, his face pinned up in ranger stations across them. He'd thought about slipping into Guatemala, or maybe vanishing into Alaska. Anywhere Lars Beckett could cease to exist, but to disappear, he needed cash lots of it, with no questions asked. On the black market, the pelt of a mature Arctic brown bear could fetch close to $50,000 if it came with the claws, teeth, and head intact. Lars knew that, and he also knew that the spring ranger patrols would start in just a few days. There was no time to fail. That afternoon, as weak sunlight filtered through the bare branches, he grabbed his rifle and binoculars and followed the dry creek. His eyes scanned for claw marks, snapped twigs, some shallow slides in the mud suggesting something heavy. Could be a deer, could be a bear. At a bend where the stream split into 2 channels, Lars crouched and studied the mud. There it was, a massive paw print, bigger than his hand. The pad had sunk deep. Claw marks, too. Bear. A big one. He looked up into the still shadowed forest ahead. No bird song, no squirrels, no wind, a silence so heavy it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. But Lars wasn't afraid. Or more accurately, he'd lived in fear so long, he didn't feel it anymore. The only thing he felt now was opportunity. And to a man like Lars, opportunity was a trap set in just the right place. Back at camp, he picked a strip of dried venison, mostly gristle, slightly rancid perfect to tempt a hungry bear fresh out of hibernation. With gloved hands, he tied the bait to a string, dangling it near a rock, just high enough for a standing bear to reach. Below it, the trap lay primed, metal jaws clenched like they were waiting for nature's first whisper. He stepped back, eyed the setup, then returned to the tent. It wasn't his first failed hunt, but it was the only time he'd ever seen the bear look back at him with eyes full of pain. And something else. Not hatred. Lars didn't know what to call it, but that look had haunted his dreams 3 times in the past year. In those dreams, the bear never roared. It just stood there, blood running from its shoulder, then slowly turned and walked away. The next morning, before the sun could pierce the mist clinging to the old pines, Lars was already out of the tent. His leather gloves were damp and limp from the moisture, but he still gripped his rifle tightly out of habit, out of survival. He carried a fresh bait pouch, strips of dried meat and leftover deer entrails from an old hunt. He moved deeper into the forest, following the dry creek. Fallen logs and rotting leaves gave off that earthy scent of cold soil and wet fungus. There were no fresh tracks, but there were no bird song either, and that made Lars take notice. Around a narrow bend, his foot slipped just slightly and then froze in place. Beneath him, half buried in slushy, mud-speckled snow, was the carcass of a deer. Its neck had been crushed, snapped clean, but the body bore no bite marks, no tears. It looked as if something had crushed it with sheer pressure, not claws. Its eyes were still open, frozen in an expression of confused terror. Lars crouched for a closer look. No wolf prints, no bear claws, nothing, only faint winding grooves in the snow around the body, as if something huge had dragged it a few feet with a thick rope. Then let go. A snake? He squinted. A memory stirred. Old rumors from the black market days. Years ago, a private exotic animal facility had burned down in Alberta. Some said a few of their giant pythons escaped into the woods when the snow melted, but that was just gossip. No one had survived to confirm. Lars gave the carcass one last glance. He didn't look back. He kept moving toward the large rock, his chosen trap site. Hands swift, he set the mechanism, tied the bait, and hung it from a low branch. 10 minutes. That's all it took. He was practiced. Every motion honed by years in the shadows, working fast, under pressure, always hunted. As he knelt to double-check the trap's trigger, the branch above him gave the faintest tremble as if touched by a passing breeze. He never had time to react. A massive, freezing weight slammed down from above. In an instant, Lars was wrapped in something muscular and unyielding, tight as living steel. Not an animal, not a man. A snake so enormous that its body looped twice around his chest and neck in a heartbeat. He thrashed on instinct, fumbling for his rifle, but it had fallen when he stumbled back. Snow soaked through his shirt. His chest flared with pain. The pressure intensified. His ribs began to crack. Breath came in ragged gasps, then in short, sharp bursts. His lungs strained for air. His vision blurred as blood stopped flowing to his brain. His heartbeat thundered in his ears like war drums, then dulled, fainter, fading into unconsciousness. Time thickened, as if the forest itself had stopped breathing. In that remote stretch of wilderness, with Lars motionless in the snow, something shifted. A roar thundered from deep within the woods. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It wasn't thunder. It was something deeper, denser, a guttural rumble that echoed through the tree trunks and into the frozen earth. The forest shivered. Birds exploded from their nests. The massive python coiled around Lars froze mid-constriction. Its body tensed like a spring, head whipping toward the sound. But before it could react less than 2 seconds later, a half-ton mass of fur crashed into it like a living pickup truck. A brown bear. Nearly 7 feet tall, its thick coat matted with mud and dried blood. It let out another roar as it charged. The impact sent the python shrieking, its coils unraveling violently from Lars as it was flung several feet across the snow. There was no strategy in the clash, just raw instinct. The bear swiped, the snake tightened. Claws tore into scales, coils wrapped around legs. But the bear wasn't trying to kill. It was trying to pull the creature off the human sprawled in the snow. Once the snake had been thrown clear, the bear didn't chase. It simply stood firm between Lars and the writhing mass. The python, after a tense pause, retreated, slithering across the snow with cold, silent motion, disappearing into the shadows beneath the trees. Only then did the bear shift. Blood was seeping from its flank, spreading into the snow in a slow, dark stain. Night falls fast and cold in Yoho. Snow drifted gently, layering the two unmoving bodies lying in the forest, a man and a bear. Lars Beckett was unconscious. His heartbeat had returned, faint but steady. His breathing was thin, irregular. Blood from the scrapes and chest trauma had begun to clot, thanks to the cold and the animal beside him. The massive brown bear had not left. It stayed, silent, still. It lowered its head, gently nudging Lars' shoulder with its snout, not to wake him, but to check for life. After a few soft prods, it licked the blood from his wrist, where the python's grip had bruised the skin to a deep purple. Then the bear moved to his knee, the torn skin from his struggle. Its movements were deliberate, precise, no fear, no hatred. Then, with a slow, weighted motion, the bear laid down only a few feet away, its massive body curled to one side, its head turned toward the unconscious man, ears perked slightly. It wasn't guarding territory. It was watching over another living soul. Morning came. The first light filtered through the treetops, not bright, but enough to cast a soft glow across the snow surrounding Lars. Pain in his chest jolted him into a coughing fit. The spasms cracked the blood that had frozen in his wounds. It burned, but it pulled him back to life. He opened his eyes. The first thing he saw wasn't the sky, wasn't the trees. It was a pair of eyes. Deep brown. Still. Watching him. Unblinking. The brown bear still there. Head slightly raised, eyes locked on his face. Lars didn't scream, didn't move. His body wouldn't let him. But it wasn't fear that kept him silent. It was the sheer impossibility of what he saw. There was no reason for the bear to stay, no reason for it to save him, no reason for it not to devour him after the snake fled. But it didn't. It simply watched. No growl, no retreat, no advance. Just a gaze, seconds long. But to Lars, it felt like a lifetime unraveling. Then, slowly, the bear rose. Its left hind leg dragged slightly, still wounded, fur matted with dried blood. It turned away. Not running, not threatening, just walking. One step at a time through the snow, disappearing back into the forest. The bear was gone. But its tracks remained deep, heavy, cutting straight into the forest without a single glance back. Lars lay still for a few more minutes, not from fear, but because the pain in his chest and left shoulder made every movement slow, deliberate, and cautious. Each cough felt like something was clenching around his ribs, but that pain also reminded him he was still alive. Slowly, he rolled onto his side, clawed the snow aside to get leverage, and pushed himself up on one elbow. Step by step, he staggered toward the tent. Not far, but not easy. The wind remained cold, the sun still faint, and in his mind, a storm of unanswered questions. When he reached the tent, the first thing he did wasn't eat, wasn't clean the blood. It was search his pack. Under damp clothes and a small knife, he found an old leather-bound notebook, last year's hunting log. The cover was mildewed, its edges warped by moisture, but the writing inside was intact. Lars flipped through the pages, numbers, coordinates, personal shorthand. He stopped at the last entry. March last year. Location, 512649° N, 165216°W. Target, adult brown bear, solitary, single shot hit shoulder blade. No pursuit. Wind shifted. Withdrew. Lars frowned. He pulled an old phone from his chest pocket, rugged, waterproof, his usual gear for the wild. The GPS still worked barely. He typed in the old coordinates. The blinking dot landed right where he'd just been attacked by the snake. Lars stared at the screen. Memories began to reassemble, like a photo emerging from fog. The bear from last night, the injured hind leg, the size, the coat, the way it hadn't growled, hadn't threatened, yet had clearly remembered him. Right here, 1 year ago, he had fired on a brown bear eating berries. The bullet missed the heart, struck the shoulder. He'd left as the light failed, not wanting to risk running into rangers. He assumed it had died. He never came back. And now, that same animal, not only alive, had just saved him. He froze, staring at the GPS screen. The coordinates didn't lie. This was the exact spot. His heartbeat slowed. His thoughts emptied. He looked down. The notebook had slipped from his hand. He hadn't noticed. No one spoke. No one had to. It remembered him, and it had spared him. Lars swallowed hard. His throat tightened. One question rose clear, sharp, and unanswered. Why? That afternoon, Lars sat silently in front of his tent. His hands rested on his knees, palms open, empty. The handgun still lay in the snow nearby, next to the closed notebook. No one told him what to do, but he knew. Something inside him had cracked. There was no moment of weeping, no vows, no dramatic repentance. Just a quiet series of actions, starting with disarming every single trap. He left the tent and retraced his steps, returning to each place he'd set snares. One by one he lifted the traps, unlatched them, wrapped them in cloth. The scent, lures, the bait bags, even the trails he had masked with so much care, now he scrubbed them clean with his bare, freezing hands. Back at camp, he built a small fire low, tight, barely enough to avoid smoke. He opened the notebook, turned through the page's coordinates, hunting notes, profit margins, and fed each one into the flame. The fire burned slowly, but he wasn't in a hurry. That notebook had mapped his life for over a decade. Every page a life traded for cash, but now every curl of ash was a piece of that old self burned away. Last came the handgun, his backup, always carried since his days as a mercenary. Not some cheap weapon, this one had saved his life more than once. But today, he didn't need it. He laid the barrel across a flat rock, clenched it with both hands, and struck it with a short steel bar. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the firing pin snapped. He kept going until the frame was bent, useless. Wind hissed through the trees. Snow began to fall again, light and steady. But Lars wasn't finished. He pulled a wooden board from his old gear pile, something he'd once used to conceal traps, and carved into it a few simple lines with his knife. I was spared. I'm not worthy, but I am grateful. No long speeches. No excuses. That was enough. Carrying the board, Lars walked back to the spot where the bear had kept vigil over him through the night. The tracks were still visible. The snow hadn't covered them yet. He planted the sign at the base of the tree, right where the bear's body had pressed into the snow. He stood there for a long time. No prayers, no hope the bear would return. But in his mind, he saw it again, lying there, bleeding, unmoving, refusing to leave. No words, no anger, no fear. He used to believe the wild belonged only to the strong, but today the strongest thing he had witnessed was forgiveness. When he finally returned to camp, he carried nothing but an empty backpack, a few items for warmth, and 2 hands lighter than they'd felt in years. No one told him to leave the forest, but he knew he no longer had a reason to stay. Three days later, Lars left the forest, and at last, after 15 years on the run, he knew it was time to go where he was meant to go. The way out of Yoho National Park wasn't easy. There were no marked trails for fugitives, but Lars knew how to move through wilderness unseen just as he had once entered it. This time, he carried nothing out. No pelts, no trophies, no weapons, no excuses. Just a light pack, a few survival basics, a hand-marked map showing the location of the wooden sign he left behind, and something in his chest that would never be the same. By dusk, he reached the ranger outpost near the park's edge. A young officer, just starting his shift, spotted a bearded man in a battered coat, deep-set eyes, dried mud on his hands, standing silently at the door, no large pack, no weapon, just standing. "Can I help you?" the ranger asked, hand hovering near the radio. Lars stayed quiet for a few seconds, then slowly raised his hands, not dramatic, just clear. "My name is Lars Beckett," he said, his voice dry and hoarse. "I'm here to turn myself in." The mood in the room shifted instantly. The ranger called it in. Within an hour, Lars was in a holding room, lightly cuffed, no resistance. They asked why. 3 investigators, 2 federal agents, 1 from wildlife enforcement, took turns. Why now? What had he been doing all these years? Was anyone else involved? Was he hiding something about a poaching ring? Lars didn't lie, but he didn't say much either. He spoke only when necessary. And when a middle-aged ranger, someone who clearly had followed his case for a while, asked, "What's the real reason you left the woods, Lars?" He looked the man in the eye. No bowing of the head, no tears, no excuses. Just a quiet voice, drained of all emotion. An animal did something no human ever did. It spared me. The room fell silent. No one fully understood what he meant, but everyone felt there was something deeper, something moral that didn't belong in an interrogation room, something law couldn't measure. When they checked his phone, a rugged, outdated model barely holding a charge, they found a few scattered photos, trees, animal tracks, GPS logs, and one final image, taken the morning after the attack. A bear's footprint stamped deep in the snow, sharp, untouched by wind. No other human tracks nearby. That photo was from the place Lars had collapsed, where the bear had watched over him until morning. There was no caption, no name. But Lars had set it as his phone wallpaper, perhaps, so he'd never forget the moment he should have died. But didn't. The legal process unfolded. Lars faced multiple charges: illegal hunting, trafficking endangered species, federal flight. He didn't appeal. He didn't hire a private lawyer. He answered only what was asked, cooperated fully, accepted the charges with quiet calm. During one deposition, a young officer went off script and asked, "If that bear hadn't saved you, would you still have changed?" Lars looked up. There was no anger in his eyes. No regret either, only the look of someone who had crossed the edge of life and come back. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I don't know." In the official case files, the bear was never mentioned. Only one photo remained, a single footprint pressed into snow, captured that morning, still saved in Lars's old phone. No caption, no date, no photographer, just a footprint, a moment, a silent reminder. Some lessons don't come from people. If you believe nature still has something to teach us, something deeper than words, follow this channel. The stories here don't just speak, they stay.